Okay. Hey, oops. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the New Media Show. My name is Todd Cochran. Of course, I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Rob Greenlee. Rob, how you doing?
I'm doing terrific, Todd. It's great to be back doing the show. You know, this cadence of Wednesday, Saturday definitely allows us to keep up with things that have been going on.
Well, this morning it was like, ugh, I have to crawl in here. And actually, we're going to introduce Gordon in a minute. But, you know, I did not made. That's probably incorrect. That's probably socially incorrect to say that. I cleaned up the toilets, the office. So that's what I did this morning here before the show. Wow. So, and yes, I have washed my hands. So
that's right. That's the last thing we want is a unsanitary podcast.
Especially yes. I'm touching buttons here, but anyway,
yes.
We're going to welcome Gordon Firemark to the show. Gordon, how have you been?
I'm great, Todd. Thanks for having me. Hi, Rob. Nice to see you.
Hey, Gordon. It's great. I appreciate you coming on. And these are interesting times, aren't they? And on the legal side, even to some degree, in the podcasting realm. So
the ancient curse is coming true. Yes.
First of all, I wanted to say, our last episode was sparked some heated discussions in the podcasting space. I guess that's a nice way of putting it. And I just want to apologize for any impression that I had, that I was mean or accusatory or any kind of, creating an unsafe space out there for podcast listeners. I don't think, if you look at the history of Todd and I don't think that's something that we've created on this show, but I do want to apologize for any impression that we gave. There is a long history of heated discussions but not personal attacks. So that's not something that's been a part of the podcasting ecosystem. But there's been a lot of issues over the years that the community has discussed in a heated way, and sometimes those, there are differing opinions on things, and I just wanted to set the stage and apologize for anything that I had said that maybe came across as a personal attack.
I think Eric felt like he was under attack, and I don't think we want to. The article, I don't think the article was the issue. So just so Eric knows that.
No, it wasn't. No.
I think the issue was this claim of 20 years. And then, what's funny is I did an interview yesterday with Adam on the Podcast 2.0 show. And if you want to use the 20 as the marker, it's actually 21. But you'll have to listen to the Podcast 2.0 show to understand why it's 21 and not 20. But I think from my point of view, we can fully understand that the technology, the idea, the concept, and we said this, I think we said this on the last show, just so we're clear, was developed in late 2000 and early 2001. The new fact, I'm not going to say fact, the new thing that poked its head out was Dave Weiner making a claim that he'd made a podcatcher earlier before Adam. To me, I knew he had Userland, and I knew he was. You could see an enclosure in a feed reader. People don't even use feed readers anymore. You could see it on some of his software, but the iPod didn't come out until like August of 2001. So if there was actually a script made, this is new. And I went through all my book notes and looked through all that, and having emails from both of those guys. So I'll just, it is what it is. My personal opinion, and this is just Todd, podcasting started when there was the ability to
connect all the dots.
All the dots. And plus it was the podcasters too, as a creator. So, but anyway, I'm going to say 16 plus. If someone else wants to say 20 or 21, okay, it's semantics. At this point, it's just because we're passionate about the space. Because we were here.
Right. We actually went through it and felt it, and we're keeping a very close eye on what was happening. And when those details were not disclosed over the last 16 years until this past week. So I guess that changes the conversation to some degree.
The only thing that wasn't disclosed was that there was a podcatcher before Adam's podcatcher.
Well, let's be fair to Dave. I believe that was created so they could test the process of pulling an enclosure, right? So
I would think so.
Yeah. So it was an experimental test process.
But from 2000 or 2001, there was technically no podcasters. There was people experimenting with something. Podcast was named in early 2004, and then the mechanism. So if you want to say, I don't know, Gordon.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Gordon, what's your thoughts?
It's all about.
He probably doesn't even want to weigh in on this.
It's all about where you're at. Is it when there was an idea? Is that the start, or was there when the movement, or all I can say is,
if you go back to early media pioneers and talking about things, McLuhan said the medium is the message, and then there's the controversy of, well, is the message the medium or the medium is the message? And the truth is, you can point to the technology anywhere in the history, in the timeline of technology. You can say, hey, without Ben Franklin, there'd be no electricity, and therefore there would be no podcasting. So, and in the long run, it doesn't really matter. I mean, all of these people contributed in tremendous ways to making this medium possible, and realizing the promise of a more level playing field for creating media. So, kudos to them all, and I don't think it matters what the timeline exactly looks like. I mean, at some point, history matters, but this is small potatoes.
And here's the fact: we've never, I have always from day one said that Dave Weiner and Adam Curry were the podfathers of podcasting. I have never said otherwise.
No debate on that.
And I've never said that 2004 was when it was invented. We know the history. I wrote the history in 2005. So anyway, and not only I, but I was the one that documented it with, interviews and questions, and so it is what it is. So, and if you were offended, this is the New Media Show. So we're sorry, but come on, let's have a conversation. And we get spirited. That's what this is about. We love this space.
It is interesting.
Well, I don't think what we did on that show is any different than we've been doing on the show for as long as we've been doing it. So,
Rob, can you hear Gordon? You're stepping all over him.
Yeah, I can hear him.
Okay,
it's just quiet. He's quiet in the background.
All right. Go ahead, Gordon. Say that again.
I was saying, it's sort of weird to be talking about this now 20-year-old technology and calling it new media on the New Media Show.
Right.
But again, it's just words, just names.
That's true too. Yeah.
Exactly.
So it is an example, and if we wanted to kind of lead into our, the main reason that we wanted to have Gordon on the show, he's a podcaster and an attorney, and he's been playing around with the legal issues and helping people in the podcasting space with legal questions and legal issues for many years. And I think we're at an interesting time where, and what happened this past week is an example of a little bit of the, I guess, cultural and legal conflict that's going on much more broadly around content and platforms and each individual's rights to around free speech and rights of companies to control their brands and what is said on their platforms. And I think it's interesting convergence. And what happened to this show last week is a little bit of an example of free speech and consequences for free speech that are maybe even outside of the realm of legal consequences or whatever. But Gordon, I mean, what's your perspective, as you look at what's happening in the world today around takedowns of content creators, and I know this is a huge topic, but takedown around free speech, and does free speech apply to a private company? I mean, can a company decide what speech that they have on their platform?
Well, I think we have to distinguish between, free speech and First Amendment and what is censorship. There's different flavors of these things. Censorship can happen. I like to talk about sort of three levels of censorship. There's government censorship. That's the stuff that's implicating the First Amendment and constitutionality. But there's also private censorship, where companies, businesses, and individuals, get to sort of decide what messages they want to share and what messages they don't want to share or be a part of. And then, of course, self-censorship, which I think is the most insidious one, is the one where you're doing it to yourself because you're afraid of what the consequences might be. And, so these all play in together. The First Amendment here in the U.S., the free speech principle is embodied in this First Amendment that says government shall make Congress shall make no law that abridges the freedom of speech or of the press and religion and other. I don't want to get into the whole thing. Anyway, the point being that it takes government action for there to be a violation of the First Amendment. When Twitter or Apple or Google or Amazon decide they're not going to allow someone or some app or something like that to use their service, that is a private business making a decision about who their customers are going to be and who they're not. And, you see the signs in restaurants, we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. It's the same thing going on. These companies get to make that choice. That's them exercising their free speech and free association rights, in a sense. And we have Supreme Court precedent that says companies are people for the purposes of free speech. And so we can't mandate that they carry any particular message or any particular business's offerings.
At the same time, there has been some cases where service refused was considered to be discrimination.
That's right. Yeah, there are some exceptions to this, and that mainly deals with discrimination of people who are in a protected class, race, religion, gender, sexual preference or orientation, depending on all those kinds of things. But we also had that case involving the bakery in Colorado a couple of years ago, and that was ultimately decided not on speech ground. Well, it was that the state commission was hostile to speech, not the baker's decisions themselves. So there's a lot of moving parts here. But if Twitter wants to say enough is enough, I think that's within their rights. And whether it's the right decision or not is something that we as consumers can talk about and decide whether we're going to vote with our dollars.
Well, that's the social consequences, right?
Oh, Rob, you're cutting out
the
bad.
Legal consequences, I think, is where we kind of convert. Oh, I'm cutting out?
Yeah, you're cutting out really bad.
Yeah, I must be having bandwidth problems here. I think it was this past week, Parler, I guess, went before a judge, and I guess the judge ruled that the platform had the right to take them down, I guess, and that kind of follows what you were saying, Gordon, about that, is that the companies have a right to do that. Now, granted, what's the role of a terms of service in that process? Does a company have to publicly disclose what that is before they can take an action like that? And how does a platform, how responsible is a platform to notifying its users prior to making any kind of change or adjustments to a terms of service?
I think even that obligation of a prior warning or disclosure is something that's covered or could be covered in the terms of service. Those terms of service could say, we're going to give you 3 strikes, or we're going to give you 2 warnings before we take a final action or something like that. I think a lot of companies don't bother to do that or don't choose to do that because it gives them greater discretion on how to handle these things. That discretion, of course, opens them up to accusations as well as things. But, I think most of these companies are pretty good about saying, hey, you're violating our terms, don't do it again. The Parler situation is an interesting one because I don't know if they got any of those kind of warnings. And I don't know that Amazon was required to in that instance. It was Amazon and Apple. The terms of service are what they are, and that contract, we have freedom of contract. You can choose not to do business with a company if you don't like their terms of service.
I'll play devil's advocate a little bit here. So today, let's look at the way the internet is perceived. It is perceived as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Mm-hmm. It's perceived to be a handful,
like a public square kind of
handful of sites. And what I have on my website, my.com, is in no way related to what Facebook is. But people get on Facebook, and because it is so widely used, they assume that they're protected there from censorship. And because it's become ambiguous with the space, and at the same time is there both these groups, and that we won't talk about Amazon because Amazon did what they did, but let's talk about the situation with Facebook and stuff that they did. They were censoring what they perceived to be something, whatever they perceived. Now here's the problem though, me as a podcasting owner, we really look at that Section 230, and I don't go looking for content. I don't go digging around, because that's what Section 230 protects me. So the argument has been here now for a while that Facebook, if they are going to moderate, and Twitter, if they are going to moderate, should lose their protection under Section 230. I think they should.
Well, there's another provision also part of Section 230 that creates a protection for the owner of a business like that does choose to moderate. So it's not just you don't have to, but if you want to, you can, is also in that same law. So I don't know about losing your Section 230 privilege. Now, what's interesting here is I think there's a lot to be said for the idea that these, Apple and Google have essentially 100% between them of the App Store marketplace.
Right.
And Facebook has a giant chunk of the social discourse marketplace. We could look at whether antitrust laws, are they colluding? Are they in restraint of trade? Are there other reasons that they should be under scrutiny and maybe held to a different standard? Or maybe we need to amend Section 230 to say, hey, if you want to be in this safe harbor, then you also have to behave in what used to be called the common carrier kind of an approach, where you wouldn't exercise editorial scrutiny or discretion over your content. But, the way the law is written right now, I think they're within their rights to do so, and it's going to come down to market forces that have to be brought to bear.
I think it goes back again, and I continue to say it, 99.95 of all percentage of all podcasts are never going to be in a position where they're going to be deplatformed. Or most of the takedowns that happen, and we've talked about this a dozen times, is because of copyright violation, not because of a speech issue.
But you know what? Which one was a Podcast Business Journal yesterday carried a piece about this renting studio space up in upstate New York that they're basically getting evicted because the owners of the building didn't like the kinds of podcasts that were being produced in this, and he was renting them out to these podcasts. It wasn't even his shows. And again, there you've got private owner of the property telling the tenant what they can and can't do in the property. I mean, I guess if you don't want to have a smoke shop in your building, you could say that too. But content restrictions or content-based restrictions and decisions are definitely challenging, and I don't think any owner takes them lightly. But Todd, both of you guys work at companies that do podcast hosting, media hosting, and as you said, you don't look at the content of the shows. But I suspect if somebody came to you, if a group came to you and said, hey, you're carrying a lot of those shows that are on this, I don't know, call it racism, call it neo-Nazi, whatever, you might have a business decision to make about whether it's in your company's best interest to continue hosting those things.
We have a term, and Rob has a term, Libsyn has a term of service, Blueberry has a terms of service, and so when someone comes, and we've said this again and again too, when someone comes to us, we say, episode time hack. And then I turn it over to our lawyer, and then he makes a decision. Was it hate speech? Was it invoking violence? And then from there, it is that gray. It is a business decision. What if they're right up on the edge and don't go over? So then there is that business decision. But, man, knock on wood, here, and maybe it's pressed wood or whatever. Let me knock over here. There's some wood there. I'm thinking MDF. 5. I think in 5. In one hand, I can probably count the number of those types of takedowns, and those were very, very clear.
Well, there are some kinds of speech that have been declared illegal. Hate speech is one of them.
Well, but hate speech is protected by the Supreme Court. So, there is now you can say it, but you're going to suffer the consequences.
Right.
Well, you can put that in your terms of service. And it could be part of your values, your beliefs, right? Of what's good. If it's ever challenged, and goes before the Supreme Court, you might lose, right? That's the fallout of this case that you're bringing up, Gordon, up in upstate New York. It's an interesting situation because I went and watched some of the videos that this content creator is creating, and a lot of them are on YouTube, and they are still on YouTube. I didn't hear a lot of hate speech in there. I think that the branding and how they look and how they present themselves, you could get the impression maybe that there's something evil going on here, but I don't. Based on what I've heard so far, I'm not really hearing anything that anybody should be all that concerned about. So this may be just an extreme reaction to maybe one comment somebody made. And I guess that's what it gets back to, too, is in most of the examples, Todd probably will confirm this, but most of the examples of when this happens, it's not like it's an ongoing thing that this content creator has done over the history. It's usually like one episode. One that had some over-the-line comment, right?
That gets you
that got him taken down.
That spotlight shined by the call them social justice warrior groups,
right?
And that's cancel culture at work, which is sort of an extreme end of using that economic power that I was talking about. We as customers get to decide what we spend our money on or where we direct our business. But when we get these hot button issues, you get groups that try to leverage that to put pressure on the businesses. And we don't know, you're right, Rob, we don't know what's going on in the background of that relationship between landlord and tenant either. It could be a lot more than just the content on the show.
And I think too, it's a difficult, I wouldn't want to have to be in that individual's position because he's just providing studio space. But again, at the same point, there's that fine line. It's who you want to do business with.
Well, let's take it to a different extreme. If I'm an owner of a movie studio, of a facility where movies are filmed, and some pornography producer comes in and wants to shoot their movies in my place, do I get to say yes or no?
That's true. You get to say yes or no.
Yeah. There was actually a case I think it was in the Hamptons, Martha's Vineyard or something, where a woman had rented out an Airbnb, her house as an Airbnb, and they used it to film a porno movie.
in my lease for my office in Columbus, the lease is 89 pages. And so, of course, we had to have a commercial real estate lawyer go through there and say, okay, according to your business, here's lines 862, 1043. Maybe we need to get some protection there for you and have an adjustment of the lease. So I think what this really goes back to is if you're going to have a lease and you're going to be doing content, then you better have it locked down that you're not going to lose that business if someone's pissed off about. It could be anything. It could be a show doing something about guns. It could be someone doing a show on Bitcoin.
Vegan cooking show.
You just don't know where a social justice warrior campaign is going to be launched against someone because of something that is in that show that pisses people off. So,
and that's the really insidious thing about speech in this modern era, is that cancel culture, social justice warrior kind of a thing can be brought. And my personal feeling is that we should all sort of resist that as much as possible. But we all have to draw our own lines based on our moral values and things like that. And back to what happened in the political arena this last couple of weeks. I think these companies made their decisions about it, and they will reap the rewards or suffer the consequences, as the case may be. Personally, I think that they waited too long, and therefore it made it look like they were reacting to a single event rather than a pattern of conduct. And they could have made their case more effectively had there not been that one big event that was essentially the straw that broke the camel's back.
And what's kind of funny is in regards to Parler is everything was public. There was nothing that was not public. Right. That's the thing that kind of cracks me up about that a little bit. At the same time, there's a call now to do a big FBI investigation on Parler. But what about Facebook and Google, where a lot of this activity and organization actually happened? Not necessarily Google, but on Facebook groups. Is there a call now to investigate FBI? So sometimes there is a double standard, and it's also politicians grabbing headlines as well. So,
right.
It's interesting that it was the people who are the victims of the. Well, maybe it isn't interesting. It's ironic or whatever, but it was the Republican Congress that was calling those tech leaders into hearings. Right. Not that long ago, and so
and calling them out for all this stuff
as a retaliation. Yeah. Sorry, Rob. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that there's another thing going on here too, and that is around the Facebook and Twitter being blamed for causing this to happen in our culture, in our society, based on the concept of personalization, right? And there was that, what was it, The Social Dilemma?
Oh, that, yeah. Everyone should rewatch that after the last
right, and then add that layer on top of this. But in some ways, maybe that's not really right entirely to blame the social platforms for what's happened too. Because I believe people need to be responsible too. I mean, at some point, the people need to be responsible too, not just blame a social network that was doing what it does to aggregate audience and things like that. And I think a lot of people blame the media, and a lot of people blame everybody else for what's happening in the world, when maybe in a lot of cases, maybe we need to look in the mirror and say, how am I contributing to this? Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people that don't trust any of the sources. They don't know what to believe anymore because there's just so much information out there, and that's a big problem too. But
but it's also behavior, Todd. I think people can talk about things online without taking them into the real world.
Yeah, right. They wouldn't say it face to face if they were right. And if they were, they would be called on it, and then there would be a discussion about it, which it can be. We've all seen those threads where it goes ugly. I think too, if you look at. For me, I think the challenge I have is, what do you do now if you are a business owner and you have an online presence and you're running a site that could be considered controversial? You almost have to rethink your complete business plan, because there is a good chance that, now this is a unique time, is when there's been some others have been taken down. So, it's going to be a unique time where maybe people aren't going to trust the cloud so much. Maybe they're going to have to get their own iron again in data centers, and they're going to have to negotiate their own internet connections again instead of using these cloud services. Because if a business company, it goes right back to what I've said about podcasting for a long time. If you're building your land on rented ground, that's with risk. So,
well, I think there's a lot of opportunity for businesses to come into the space and say, we are all about being content agnostic. We will not censor, we will not judge unless we're directed by a court to do so or something like that.
I don't think that can exist today. I don't think that can exist.
You don't think it can?
I don't think it can exist. Because what happened? Okay, so irregardless if there was, let's use a hypothetical that Acme Pencil Company, so it's just as something mundane as that, someone gets a hair up their butt and says, we don't like you, we don't like what you're doing, we're going to cancel, we're going to do a pressure campaign against your host, we're going to do a pressure campaign against the DNS servers. You can literally be removed from the internet today. So I don't think
players upstream and downstream, I guess is what you're saying.
That's right. So I don't think there's any way anyone can have a platform today that says we won't moderate. I don't think that can exist. I just don't think it can.
Interesting. It would be an interesting experiment for someone to experiment.
Well, not my money,
but to see if you could get the Verizons and the AT&T, the people who really control the backbone, to agree that if your content, if this is your business model, that they would leave you alone.
Yeah, I don't think so. Right. I don't think so.
In some ways, this is a little bit of an example of us, how we were in the early days of the internet, too. Of there wasn't. I mean, I think it was a little bit of both, because when the internet started, we had America Online, right? So, and everybody thought that the internet was America Online.
That's right.
And back in those days. And so, and then we've kind of moved out of that. We moved out of it for a while, and then we started to build proprietary platforms again that people aggregate in. So I guess what this means is that human nature wants to congregate, right? And so companies take advantage of that by building proprietary platforms. And so it feels like it's this yin and yang thing going on. It's like we've gone through different phases of this, and we're coming into a time where we just came out of massive aggregation on proprietary platforms. And now, that hasn't worked out so great for everybody. So now we're breaking away from that and going back to what happened after we came out of America Online in the early days of the internet. So it feels like deja vu to some degree, Todd.
Some of us were laughing at people that were on AOL. We're like, there is a world beyond AOL.
Right. You've got mail.
But
every once in a while, I still see someone with an AOL email address or something.
Right. I saw one the other day. It was kind of weird. But it brings back the point. Why? See, most people can't perceive this at this time because they weren't there. Why when podcasting started was it so remarkable? It was remarkable because we were pissed off at the gatekeepers. We were pissed off at the Microsoft world. We were pissed off at the cable company world. We were mad at radio. You couldn't. You could put media online,
right?
But it was very, very difficult. And
open source, right? Open platforms, so Napster, all that stuff.
Right. Yeah. So, and it was, really the attitude was, middle finger to the man. You can't stop us anymore. And then, so now we're at a point where everyone was very independent and, saying that I am in control. But we've changed. We're 16 years ahead now, and people are, it's about platforms. It's about, hanging out in certain locations. But maybe this will give people pause and make them think that, do I need to put all my chickens in one basket or all my eggs in one basket?
Well, isn't that how the man has always operated? Is when he spots that when he spots that area of discontent, he finds a way to flip it around and occupy that space in a way that feels safe for people until it doesn't. Right. Here we are again.
So there is a little bit of a model that's starting to form in a small country in Europe. I'm trying to remember which country it is. I don't know, is it Lithuania or some country where or was it, I can't remember which country it was, but they are creating this whole new infrastructure around the internet where each of their citizens owns the control of all the information that they publish online. So it's almost like you as a person, you have an account with the internet, right?
Yeah.
And anything you post on there, and this is maybe where blockchain technology comes into play at some point in the future here, where you own everything that you post online. You own your accounts everywhere. All the content is owned by each citizen in that country. So it's similar to like the Social Security numbers, right? So, but that's all public but private information. So it's an interesting change on how we might be able to evolve this into something that is open, but yet the individual is in full control of all of the data. They can go in and delete things. They can remove things that were posted. There's a collaboration that can happen between people in this tool. I don't know. It's hard to say how that applies to this conversation in some ways, but it's an interesting thing that I think that there is the potential of a model that is less confrontational to what we're seeing today around proprietary and open platforms.
That is actually, a lot of that is happening at the whole EU level. There's a lot of that data ownership, data privacy kind of stuff happening there. But, the big contrast is here, and coming back to the law, the U.S. Supreme Court has said companies are people too for the purposes of free speech. And so when, in Europe, the EU can say to Google, hey, you've got to take that down. They can't do that here. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. What's interesting, though, is that I think that if enough people are concerned about these issues, there is precedent in the law for treating media and data companies as common carriers. The cable TV companies had must-carry rules. The telephone service providers aren't allowed to listen in on your calls and decide which ones they're going to let through. The package shipping industry doesn't get to decide, we're not going to ship that box because we don't like what's in it. So it's theoretically possible to classify some of these businesses more like those common carriers under the law goes back to the 1860s, I think. But, it would be something to maybe look to our elected leaders to try to make happen.
I mean, is there a danger of that, though, just based on what we have seen happen, that gets taken advantage of, right? And it causes conflict and, I hate to say, but
of unintended consequences,
a form of digital civil war, because everybody's able to say anything and not be accountable to anything. Yeah.
Well,
I think that's what the framers actually envisioned.
Right.
This giant open.
No, I know, but I mean,
where everybody's
like we've been saying, there's consequences for free speech, and that's what the consequences might be.
And there's this fine line too. I did an interview with a gal. It came out in ProRepublica, and part of the conversation I was having with her is like, all right, there's been a lot of recently looking at shows that you would, on the surface, if you never listened to content, you would say that's a conspiracy show. And maybe it's not framed as a conspiracy show when it's recorded, but on the surface, maybe some of us will look at it and say, oh, that's just conspiracy talk. Well, there's been conspiracy talk all the time, but yet now you almost have to be very careful about talking about Bigfoot, because it's all of a sudden like, oh my God, you're a Bigfoot believer. Take that content down. So,
well, the Flat Earth Society. I mean, that's another
Flat
example
Earth,
of it,
Earth
right?
2. All this stuff, Q and everything else. So there's this there. So where but it's also, I think, a bit about how it's framed, how the content's framed.
Right.
But you're allowed to be a wacko.
Yeah. I think anonymity is a component of this too. It's much easier to be controversial or even offensive when there are not going to be any consequences because nobody knows it was you who said it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you address that, but
well, I mean, a lot of these platforms have kind of shifted towards, real user identity. I think even Parler did that as well, right?
Yeah.
Where they had sign-up process where you had to verify your who you were, and that's
and no private.
That is one way to combat that.
Yeah, there was no private groups, nothing. It was all public discussion, all open. And that's the thing. If people think about, like, wow, that's in a different circumstance. Some people would say, wow, that's pretty cool. But it was so politically charged,
right?
Yeah. But oh man, it is interesting times for sure. And Gordon, have you seen anything come through? Have you had clients call and say, I'm worried?
I haven't had clients call me, and I've had discussions in groups, but I haven't had any individuals come to me and say, I have a particular concern about. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I've had the cancel culture thing come up a couple of times where somebody's been threatened with or subjected to some kind of a boycott or something like that. Usually in the context of a disgruntled former podcast guest trying to make trouble for a host. And, I'm on that crusade to get people to sign releases when they have them on a show. But, and usually the answer is, well, if you want to take the episode down and succumb to that kind of pressure, that's your business. But, there's something to be said, as I advocated a genuine public square approach where anything goes. Hey, as the host, you have a right to stand up for your free speech rights in the face of that kind of threat or controversy. But, everybody has their own business decisions to make about this stuff.
And based on this, and you talking about anonymity, I could see a lot more podcasts now being launched with the host being anonymous or using a stage name.
Sure.
Because I go all the way back to the beginning of podcasting. I had a podcaster that was making good six figures every year. And he told me, Todd, please, never, ever, 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 ever. He I would have never done it, but he almost begged me, don't ever say how much money I make on my show because I'll lose my job. They know how much I'm making on my side job, on my side business, I'll lose my job. And he worked for a very big company that didn't, it was a little sideline thing. It was nothing to do, had absolutely no relationship to his content. So that was one specific thing. For me, when I was in the Navy, I held a security clearance. And there would be, I do a tech show. So there would be certain topics that would come up, be like, oh, I'm not talking about that, because there was sometimes a direct correlation between a story that I wanted to cover because I had background, but it was like, no, it's too close to the job. So I self-censored in that situation and just didn't talk about that. But I think today you made light of it. I think there's a lot of people that are very, very scared to vocalize any type of opinion anymore, even if it may not be controversial. I think people are, at least in certain forums, are becoming very scared to speak.
Well, and I think we've seen a lot of that around women in podcasting too, around certain topics of podcasts where they've taken on a stage persona that protected their professional life or just their plain safety around their identity. And we've Todd, you and I have seen it firsthand with the guest that was supposed to be on this show.
Yep.
That was under escort at an event.
They were scared for their physical safety.
Right. And she was a very, very popular and long-term podcaster. So it was, we've seen it firsthand. I've known other podcasts that were doing shows on sexual relationships type content, and they were very concerned about their identity getting linked up with that.
And then there's a whole industry and people trying to out people. They're doing anonymous shows. They're trying to now figure out who was this person.
Yeah. And that's been in the blog world too. There was the whole controversy around the fake Steve Jobs blog, that kind of thing. Oh, Gordon's talking.
Yeah, you're having a hard time hearing him. I'm going to have to turn Gordon's volume up a little bit, I think. I have to reach around.
Yeah, I can't hear him.
Yeah, what were you, Gordon, can you repeat what you said?
I was just saying, there are mechanisms that would allow those folks who want to identify an anonymous host or podcast producer or something like that to force the media hosting company or the web hosting company to reveal the identity of their customer. It's not easy, but if somebody's serious about it, they can make it happen.
It's usually through legal means and discovery and that kind of stuff. So we've seen that happen with someone that was doing an anonymous show. They slandered. I mean, like, it was. I heard it. I'm like, oh, that wasn't good. And the person, did a lawsuit, and within a couple of weeks, all of a sudden, we got the notification who owns this account.
Yeah, so if you trash talk people on your show, even if you're anonymous, that may not last for long.
Right.
If you get it wrong.
Yeah, if you get it wrong.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Do you think there's going to be more anonymous shows now?
I hope so.
Oh.
I think that's how people, that openness, that freedom. I hope that people are responsible about it.
Yeah.
But I think that, frankly, that's kind of the fun of it. I mean, it's nice to know it's Joe Rogan talking, but it's also kind of fun when you don't know who it is. You think who it is, but you don't really know. That could actually be really good marketing. if it doesn't become too ubiquitous.
Yeah.
But in some ways, that doesn't really protect you, though, in some ways, because then there'll be, if something does happen, they can, they can try and dig you up, right?
Anonymity isn't real. It's perceptual, and it's something that happens at the surface level. But if you infringe a copyright or a trademark, or you defame somebody or invade somebody's privacy, you give anybody legal reason to come after you, they're going to find out. Let's face it, you guys both from hosting companies, you're not going to fight over getting a subpoena for that. You're going to comply with the subpoena. It's not worth the time and energy, and your terms of service allow you, and your privacy terms allow you to comply with the court order. So you're going to do it.
When a court comes calling with a court order, that's I can say no, but guess what that's going to do? Now I'm going to have to go to court,
right?
And say and defend why I'm not giving up this information. So I think that a lot of it's circumstantial. And we say, well, we'll fight this, and we're not going to give up the information. I think a lot has to do with the context of what's being, why someone is being sued, or whatever it may be.
Yeah. So just being anonymous doesn't protect you from potential consequences of illegal activity or being taken down. What it does is it just protects potentially at some level protects your personal safety or identity in a various type of situations, like your career or your personal safety. So I think it's interesting.
A layer of protection,
did we lose Gordon?
Not a impenetrable barrier.
No.
So.
No, I'm trying to make some adjustments to the audio. It's on you, Rob.
Okay.
You can keep talking.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. But I think that there's all sorts of issues that are popping up around this topic, and I think the podcasting space is being seen more and more as more of a safe haven for free speech right now. And I don't know if that's a fair label to put on podcasting. Is it really any different than anything else, is the other question, or is it just that we haven't been targeted yet? And what's your thought on that, Gordon?
It may be that we haven't been targeted. I mean, I do think that it is an opportunity for less moderated, fewer gatekeepers in the equation. And, really, as the host of the show, I choose what's on it, at least for now. I don't see the law changing that anytime soon. The First Amendment is pretty powerful. But, these economic forces that we've been talking about are certainly there and at work, and the potential for either that self-censorship coming in because you have economic interest to protect, or companies in downstream, or I don't know whether it's upstream or downstream of the show host, may come in. But I think you have to get pretty controversial, pretty far afield before that's ever going to come to bear.
Right. And I think that the self-censorship thing has really always been there to some degree, depending on your values and your I guess,
of course,
the position, right?
Of course,
that you have in whatever topic or field area that you have, right?
Yeah, as Todd said earlier, the things that you would say in the public square face to face with a person are different in tone and character and probably content than the things you would say when you have the intermediation of computers and wire. Nobody's able to reach through the wires and punch you in the face for what you say.
That's right.
I'm sure that's coming, Gordon.
Yes, everybody's going to have a boxing glove
virtual
on a pistol
reality,
that
right?
Sits
that we're
here
all going to be
for
living
someone
in
to push the button.
Hey, I just I hope that podcasters that are doing see here's if okay, you come to me and say, Todd, I'm going to do a show that's really kind of controversial, or it's conspiracy based. I'm going to be like, then I would approach doing a show like that, where I would say, this is the such and such conspiracy show. I would make light of stuff, but you can be light and share what you think is a conspiracy you may believe in and not be perceived as a wacko. So there is a way to present content if you think it's a conspiracy that allows you to thread this needle. It's one thing to say, well, I think JFK Jr. is still alive. And then the thing to say is, guys, I heard some people think JFK Jr. is still alive. So there's different contexts as a way you can present stuff in the show.
But even that, I think, exposes you to the possibility that the further out on the fringes wackos that believe this thing so firmly come at you and essentially try to cancel you because you've made light of it.
Oh, that's true.
So there's no way to win.
Yeah.
At risk of being a Star Trek nerd, it's the Kobayashi Maru scenario. Right. There's no winning.
That's true. That's true, because then it's like the ones that believe it to say, "Oh my God, what are you saying? That is the truth."
How can you make fun of it? So that's right. Not right. You crazy.
Todd, you're making fun of it.
Somebody, you're
insulting my beliefs.
Somebody's always going to be offended.
That's right.
And I can say vanilla ice cream is great, and I'm going to have the chocolate enthusiasts. Not that it matters. Hey, who invented podcasting?
Right. My grandfather, God bless his rest of his soul, he would. As a teenager, I was always amazed because I would sit around and people would pull in the driveway, and the men at the time, they're all chewing tobacco and spitting in the bucket and talking, and I'm just sitting there, this little kid listening, and my grandfather would he'd become devil's advocate, and he'd pick another role, and he would fight and argue, and I'd be like, I know he doesn't believe that, but he would for just sport. Mm-hmm. Play devil's advocate to have a conversation and have discourse. And I think a lot of people today cannot have regular discourse. And we've got to a point, at least here in the United States, where it's, I'm right. No, I'm right. You're wrong. You're wrong. You can't have a conversation. And it's been going on for a long, long time. And I think it's what Rob alluded to earlier, is that now if you think someone is right, you want to or wrong, you want to cancel them. And I think I am always troubled when I hear about people that aren't allowed to speak at universities and where there's none of this cross of discussion. It's okay to disagree with somebody. Just like last week, if you disagree with us, great. You can disagree with us. We can still be friends and we can still move on. But I'm going to argue mine, and we'll have to agree to disagree, and we can keep on moving down the road. But
nobody is just their opinion. Your opinion does not define you as a person or as a worthwhile human being. In fact, I don't think the sum of your opinions does that. It's much more than that. And we're in a time now where people are basing their judgments of one another on a single opinion or a single point of view, and really taking some very difficult actions on the basis of something like that. And that's a shame.
Yeah, and
it goes pretty extreme too. People don't even want to be around people that have a different view. It's gotten very, very personal, and I just wonder where we go from here, right? My perception is this wasn't so much an issue. I mean, the internet's been around for a long time. There's been debates and discord. I just wonder what has changed that has caused this to accelerate and ramp up to be much more of an issue than maybe it always has been. We just didn't perceive it that way somehow. I don't know. I mean, where do we go from here is the next question.
What Facebook feeds me is what Facebook thinks I want to read. I no longer see posts from my mom. I don't see posts from you. I don't see posts from Gordon. Once in a while, I'll see posts. I don't see. I see what Facebook thinks I should see. And so what does that do? It goes back to the social dilemma. It silos us. And then when we do see something on the fringe of maybe something that value-wise is different, and we make a comment, then it turns into a bloodbath.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, Todd, I'm thinking back to the earlier days of the internet when these platforms were first getting started. And I recall having many conversations with like a Robert Scoble or some of those that were complaining that these social platforms had a lot of noise in them, right? This comment of noise is what he perceived as non-relevant content to my interests, right? So I think we did kind of create this with a reasoning that made sense at the time, this personalization concept. And I know we've talked about it on the show somewhat, but I think it's relevant to this conversation too, is I think as technologists, I think we thought that, it was better to deliver to people only the things that they had an interest in, right, as a better experience. But I do remember conversations happening around people having concerns that delivering information that people only had an interest in would also silo us. So there were some warning signs many years ago in discussions on this topic. But I guess maybe the social platforms were seeing economic gain by siloing us around interest in delivering ads and this whole concept of targeting. And now we're facing somewhat this issue in the podcasting realm of there's some economic benefit to segmenting podcast audiences and targeting them, right? Is this really an issue more about targeting and delivering specific content to a user that wants to see it for some economic benefit? And that may be at the heart of this whole thing.
The
almighty dollar.
Right? I'm holding up $1 for those of you listening. This is what it's all about, and they don't care about us. They don't care about the Discord and the, why would my mom's content be blocked from me on a social? I have to go look for her content because guess what? It doesn't make them no money.
It isn't about whether they care about the Discord. I think the Discord is actually good for them because they thrive on that engagement.
Yeah.
That when they push your buttons, you push back.
Yeah.
When it's all just stuff that sort of keeps you in neutral, then you're not doing anything. And that includes, push that like button or share or comment and click on that ad.
Yep.
Right. So all of they're training us to click the buttons and.
So how do we react to this? I think I guess be open to more sources of information, be proactive about not allowing ourselves to get siloed into certain information sources, I guess might be a good way of saying it. Or is that even opening a Pandora's box as well?
It's hard to break habits. And they've trained us. They've trained us like chimpanzees. Or no, like sheep. Right. That's a good analogy. We follow along like sheep. So right. A few of us might be concerned and try to break the mold, but most people just go with the flow.
Yeah, I think we might have a little bit of an effect if we stopped using the like button, if we stopped engaging with, things so much. But again, that's, we've been trained to do it. So how do we train ourselves not to? It's like going on a diet.
And
that's an interesting point, Gordon. I like that point is that you're not giving Facebook a signal that you like or dislike or have some emotional connection. See, that's the other part of this too, and it may be those optional selections that they added that had emotions linked to them that they can utilize against us.
So I know we're here live on Facebook. It's kind of funny, we're talking about Facebook. We're live on Twitter, we're on Twitch, we're on YouTube, and we want to use this to reach people so we get feedback during the live show. But if we think about it, I still will say podcasting is the last bastion of free speech. I think that it gives the biggest opportunity to the widest audience, right, left, down the middle, up, sideways, pink, purple, blue, green. I think gives everyone the ability to have a voice and get their content out there. Obviously, it's then up to them to promote their voice and to be, to get recognized and have people follow along. But, I took some breaks from Facebook. I'm still on break from mainstream. Actually, I broke the rule yesterday. I saw some headline about the guardsmen being put in the basement. And really, my approach was much different than other people's approach because I got to thinking about, in 1994, I was in Masira, Bahrain stuck in what was a Pakistani internment camp for illegal people who were illegally in the country, and we were put into this compound called Camp Suture that we ended up calling Camp Gulag, and I had the pleasure of paying $2 a day to be there, and that was the biggest, absolute, most insane shithole you've ever seen in your life. It was, I'd have rather slept on the road. So I had made the kind of comment, I'd rather been in the garage than been in the rooms they gave us there. So, That was kind of my analogy to that article that came out about guardsmen in the basement, which got everybody outraged. But I just use a perspective. You haven't seen nothing yet. The garage is awesome,
Yeah, I've heard some say that that's part of the training that the military does for soldiers is, if they go out in deployment, it's not like they're going to be staying in a 4-star hotel.
No.
So it's like don't set expectations that are that are not like what they might face in combat. Right.
So I took a break from mainstream media.
Right.
And I feel much healthier for it. And took a break from Facebook and felt much healthier for it. It's hard because my business revolves around stuff going on in Facebook, but
I'm the same way. Yeah,
you'll feel better
from Facebook, but keep listening to your podcasts because they are. I think I agree with you about the last bastion of free speech. But I'll say that is not something that we can just sit back and accept as a fact. We have to defend it. We have as podcasters and business people. We have to be vigilant. And watch out. So this conversation we've had today is right along those lines, and thank you for that.
Barry and I had a discussion about this. I'm like, because we haven't had something come up where it's tested us recently. But, Barry and I both said that we are going, at some point we'll probably be tested as a company to where are we going to draw the line. And it's something we look at very seriously. And it may come down to an unpopular decision that we say, we're going to continue to support this person's content on our platform because we believe in free speech, and as long as it doesn't again violate the terms of service, we may end up making an unpopular decision. So I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I'm sure it will at some point.
But
and from
the legal advice
perspective,
make sure
you think about its
groundwork for being able to do that.
You're stepping on Gordon again. I don't know why.
Oh, yeah.
But I'll stop. Rob has something to say.
That's okay. I was just going to say, Libsyn. If you look at the name of Libsyn, Liberated Syndication, when they started in the podcasting medium back in 2004. The whole idea was was part of that theme back then was stick it to the man. We're going to build a platform that doesn't have any gatekeepers. That's what podcasting was really all about. So I think Todd, you're right. I think over time we're going to be challenged in that because we're starting to be seen as a form of mainstream media now. So it's a lot of the big media companies are getting involved, and a lot of the values that come from those companies are going to transfer into podcasting. I think we are going to be challenged on this. And I know that Libsyn is pretty strong in their terms of service around not really specifying any content that violates terms of service. So it's pretty loose at this point, just because it's consistent with our brand.
And that, believe it or not, that's probably going to be very unpopular to some people.
Yeah, it will be.
And same with us.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we're alone. I'm sure there's a lot of other podcasting companies that have the same stance. The company that was hosting Banyan's content, it's still online, probably very unpopular for some. They haven't made a public statement about it, but, they have. The content's still online with their hosting service. So,
and that company's owned by a Chinese entity, right?
Well, they'll argue that they're a East Coast company, but
East Coast, okay,
but their origins are definitely outside the United States.
Yeah.
So
though there's many companies in the podcast space have origins outside of the U.S. Yeah. So not that matters a whole lot,
but it could, and it depends on things are looked at very differently outside the U.S. We think we're the center of the universe. And
Yeah, I would agree with you, Todd. I think in some countries around the world, content is much more fiercely cracked down on. Definitely.
Well, people get
people go to jail for the things they say in a podcast or on a blog.
People get thrown off buildings for stuff they say.
Yeah.
Right.
So, let's
be thankful for what we have here, right, is the takeaway. Yeah.
So, and again, I think we'll see how it all pans out, but there's definitely movement afoot. I don't know, Gordon, what do you think? You think there's going to be more pressure for companies like us to moderate?
Do I think no? I think that we may see government coming in and trying to regulate our industry in ways that they haven't yet. I don't know that it'll work. I don't know that it would survive constitutional scrutiny, but I think, we may be in for some fights on the subject before too long. I think the antitrust enforcement against the bigger companies, Apple and Google and maybe Facebook and probably not Twitter. Their market share isn't nearly as expansive, but and Amazon. I mean, Amazon is cruising for it.
I think Apple and their iOS and Google and their platform for Android, I think they are probably facing, or could face, I guess. We'll see what happens over the next months or so. But if you think about it, they are the gatekeeper. They can say, no, we don't want your app. And then where do you go? There's no place to go. You have been so...
Yeah. Well, there is a case in the courts right now involving Epic Games suing Apple over being kicked out of the App Store, and I think that's really the bellwether case that we should be watching, because it deals with that particular app, but there's no reason that it couldn't be applied to content or other things. I
think Apple has a good chance of winning that because it was a dispute over finance terms of service versus.
Yeah, I mean, the issue is that we won't allow you to make money the way you want to. You have to do it our way.
Right.
And since we control the means of distribution, we're essentially, it's our way or the highway. And so I think it could go either way. I think Apple probably has, the stronger position, just given that, hey, you knew what you were getting into when you started, and we haven't changed the rules on you. And you violated our terms. The
harder path, though, for companies now, if they're really truly worried about this, is they got to do a PWA. They have to build a web app that is basically available via the internet, via that .com that they go to, and it looks and smells and acts like an app, but it's not an app you can install. So at least they have that. So then you can't be kicked off, at least from the App Store. But so that, I think, is going to be looked at a lot more. I know some companies are moving to that because they do not want to be held to the constraints that Apple's holding them to by having an app. But if you don't have an app, you're not cool either. So it goes two ways.
Yeah. So to kind of complete this conversation, I know that there are some handset makers outside of the U.S. that are starting to make handsets that are utilizing a version of Linux, right? So there are some low-cost smartphones that are starting to be produced outside of the U.S. that are going to be distributed throughout Africa and other what considered to be more third world countries that will have more open ecosystems. I just don't know if those platforms will ever migrate here and have any kind of significant market share in the U.S., but that would be the only opportunity, is to create a third platform that was built on a more of an open source architecture that is basically not controlled by a proprietary gatekeeper.
So again, I don't think it can be built in that scale.
Right, and that's a problem. The cat's out of the box,
It could.
That's part of. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Edward.
I was going to say that's part of the antitrust argument, is that because these two companies have such big market share, they're effectively keeping everybody out of the market. If they were ordered to open up the app environment or just to allow their systems to accept apps from other stores, that would point things in the direction of more entrance to the marketplace. And if you believe in that economic theory, that would open up the marketplace, and that's the whole idea behind an antitrust prosecution.
And that's the solution in the end, if we want to get there, because then market forces decide. You can you can have that app that has no content moderation, and then you have to see whether that model will work, if it can survive and not be constrained by, you may not survive because of lawsuits, you may not survive because of social justice campaigns, you may not survive, or you may thrive and it's truly wild, wild west. I don't know. So I think an open internet is good, because then you vote with, like you said, Gordon, you vote with your pocketbook.
Right.
And this is why,
or your attention.
Yeah. And that's why,
I think there has been a movement towards, like you were saying, Todd, about the PWAs, which it really takes the proprietary native app infrastructure and the web infrastructure and kind of combines it into one. So you don't have these proprietary app stores, because there's only two that I understand today. Maybe Amazon kind of has their own little offshoot of it too. So maybe three app stores that are out there. And I also believe that Windows in their next version is going to create their own little version of an app store built around the Android ecosystem, but they can have their own variants of apps over there. So there could be at some point 4 different app stores that are out there. But right now, I mean, obviously there's 2 that are very dominant. And is 2 enough to push off the antitrust concerns around 2 platforms dominating as much as they are? Yeah.
And I'm not up to speed on this, but I think Android has the ability. I think they're more easy to get a third-party app on an Android device, but maybe not. Maybe that's all changed and locked down now. I'm primarily an iOS user, and we know what the story on that is.
Right.
So
my kids have Kindle devices, and we are able to get these side-loaded apps and things in there. It's no easy feat. Even for somebody who I consider myself pretty tech savvy, it's a hassle, and so the uptake is slow and spotty. But I think the 2 big ones occupying probably 95% of market share is, at least in the US, is dangerous.
Right. Yeah.
And boy, they're going to fight to keep their dominance too, because they don't print dollar bills, they print $1 million bills, on an hourly basis. So that buys a lot of legal time. They probably have got 500 or more people on. I don't have no idea how many lawyers Apple has, but I'm sure it's a big number. Big number, because $1 million buys you a lot of legal,
Right. Not that much, Todd.
Well, $1 million a minute or an hour, buys you a lot of legal support.
Right.
Yeah, and that's true. And the constraints of things. Apple and Amazon and Google, they have revenues bigger than some countries. So, so that tells you something when a private company in the United States, or a public company in the United States, makes more money than some countries. That just should make you go, wow.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why we have laws like antitrust. We do rely on the government to kind of put a throttle on some of that stuff, for good or bad. And I think it goes both ways. Yeah. But at some point, you got to say, okay, enough's enough. We got to keep the playing field a little bit level.
Yeah. And I think, too, as I look back to when dial-up was broken up, this is just a classic. AT&T owned all of long distance. Right. They had it all. Right. You had no choice. When you picked up your dial-in line and you hit one whatever, even a call halfway across the state, you are getting billed by AT&T. So when they broke up AT&T, the bells, essentially, when they broke them up, and gave opportunity to MCI, Sprint, and those other folks to come in and compete, that was a big deal. I made a lot of money off that breakup of that antitrust, because I was selling MCI.
Oh, okay.
And I made, as a matter of fact, that was the first year I was living in California, I ran into the California tax board because I failed to pay quarterly. And then when I paid my $18,000 at the end of the year, they said, "Hey, we need to talk to you."
Ouch. Well, but look what happened, right? So you broke up AT&T, and now you've got, I don't know, what is it, 3 companies still? It's AT&T and Verizon and one other outfit have the whole backbone.
So, but it kind of folded back in again because no one's using wire lines anymore. So now it's AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, whoever else.
Yeah, didn't Sprint merge with T-Mobile?
They did with T-Mobile,
I think.
Yeah.
Right.
So people
Which was an interesting one.
Yeah, people just get calls for free now. They don't realize we used to actually have to pay to talk to somebody. So how times have changed. But
the area codes used to mean something.
That's right. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Gordon, do you think that there's anything, because of what we're seeing in the marketplace today, that a podcaster needs to think about from a legal perspective when they organize their show or pull it together? Is there, a growing need to create a separate entity that separates liability at all? Or do you think that people are okay just starting a podcast and there's not a lot of risk?
Well, I do advocate forming an LLC if you're planning on doing any kind of, meaningful business with your podcast. Whether, you may not be immediately planning to monetize, but if that's on the horizon, it's easier when you start out from scratch at the beginning. But it's a cost-benefit analysis. Having a company means paying taxes and administrative stuff. It's not tremendous. In most places, here in California, it's an outrageous tax on a minimum basis. But in many places, it's not expensive to have that. And it does provide a liability shield, and it's useful to allow a structuring of ownership if you have multiple owners and members and things like that. But is it really, strictly speaking, necessary at the outset? Probably not. If you're just beginning a hobby podcast, it sort of depends on your intentions. I'd say, understanding the laws of intellectual property, understanding the boundaries of free speech into, defamation and privacy and those things. That's what's really important for podcasters who are just starting out. And I think also paying attention to what journalism is. Even if you don't necessarily think of yourself as a journalist, understanding journalistic ethics, and which is a malleable term these days, but when I was studying media, what journalism meant was, presenting things in a certain way and doing a certain amount of due diligence on the content that you're putting out there. And I think that's something we may have lost a little bit of touch with. And so many podcasters are coming in without any background in media. That's what I would say, you want to learn and study a little bit before you dive too deeply, and especially into controversial subjects.
I look at my journey in this whole thing is when I started my podcast, I started a corporation and I started as a C. Very quickly realized that was going to be very expensive. Got permission to change it to an S. That made it easier. And then had to do that through the IRS, of course. I had got the little letter say, yes, you can be an S Corp. But when I closed my first business, and then when I moved here to Michigan, I opted to go the LLC route, the second round. And then all I do is I have appropriate insurance. That's the bigger thing, because I was incurring a huge expense running a corp. Just from an accounting standpoint. LLC, it's easier to do it as a sole proprietorship or something like that, and about the same time be able to, if you think you're going to run a risk of saying something that's going to piss somebody off, then getting some liability insurance. And then that's not as easy. It's not easy to get to some of that insurance either.
Yeah, if you can find it and if you can afford it.
Right. Yeah,
sometimes the LLC liability protection is the cheaper alternative, at least at the outset. But yeah, again, the kind of show you do and the kind of work you do is going to affect the cost of that insurance. Media errors and omissions insurance is, expensive insurance.
$2,000 a month. I mean, $2,000 a year. Excuse me, $2,000.
Oh, that's not so bad.
Yeah.
I've seen bills, in the 5 and 6 figures a year for companies that are putting out a lot of shows.
Right.
So that's wow.
Lloyd's.
Yeah. Well, and it's not unlike general business liability insurance, really.
Oh.
That's what
usually it's a separate policy, and only a few carriers actually do it.
That's right, only a few. And it's and it's not necessarily because they review your content, and they go through all that. What type of content are you creating, and they
ask you questions like, do you have lawyers who review your content? Whether the answer is yes or no affects the pricing, I suspect. What about your music? What about, do you use music in your show? Do you properly license it? All those kinds of things will be on that questionnaire.
So, Gordon, maybe you'll agree or disagree with me. I always tell people it's better to have an opinion on a podcast than to state something direct as a fact.
Well, in this day of alternative facts, thank you, Kellyanne Conway. I think that's right. Opinion is protected speech.
Right.
You are entitled to have your opinion and express it. When you say something as fact, you better be right. Because if that fact isn't true and hurts somebody's reputation, that exposes you to the liability for slander or libel.
But it doesn't necessarily going to stop you from getting sued if you give your opinion that someone is a beep, beep, beep. You still might get sued, but at least it's your opinion, not that it's your liability might be a little bit less.
Of fact masquerading as opinion.
That's true.
You can couch you can say, in my opinion, so-and-so is XYZ because they did A, B, and C, and you've pretty much made the case for it being a fact. And so, as in everything in the law, it depends.
It depends.
Everything depends.
And who has the most money for their lawyer? That's usually how it ends up.
Yes.
Yeah, and how the judge got out of bed that morning, right?
Right.
Well, when I got into a situation where I was being very, very cautious in some content I created when we were trying to deal with a school situation, and I was running the social media campaign talking about a principal, talking about a superintendent and stuff that, I used FOIA requests to cover my butt because I was like, I want something on a piece of paper.
But that's what I'm talking about journalism.
Right.
You did journalism there. You didn't just spew it out there and hope for the no consequences.
But still, here's his email where he said this. That is you're protecting yourself. But again, it's right. But that wasn't cheap. It wasn't cheap to do. It's not cheap to do a FOIA, and most shows won't do that.
Right.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in the media today too. And I think it's given a lot of accusations and a lot of comes across as almost personal attacks that you're seeing even in the mainstream media, which is always interesting when I see, because of all the same issues that you were talking about. And I think that may be why we're seeing the kind of emotion that's laced in our culture today, is that people are feeling emboldened that they can actually do those kinds of things more than ever before. And I'm not quite sure what has changed on that.
I think mainstream media on both sides is guilty of causing gasoline being poured on the flame, on the pile.
Yeah. And that goes back to the mid-'80s. 1987, under the Reagan administration, we had deregulation of the media. We took away the fairness doctrine, which required, at the time it was broadcasters, because it was the FCC, required them to present what now Fox has turned into a slogan: fair and balanced reporting. And you as a broadcast licensee, you risked your license if you were proven not to be presenting a balanced presentation of things. And so we took away that regulation, that requirement, and that allowed for the polarizing of media, and you got the left-wing media and the right-wing media, and a few people tried to stay in the center, but you get pulled in one direction.
It doesn't seem like a successful place to be.
No.
Right.
It's not.
But that segmenting of audience allowed those companies to make huge tons of money, and so the economic point of view says, well, that's great, and the social freedom, I don't know what you call it, anyway. So that's where that all started, and some of that journalistic integrity that old school reporters would really have complained about, it just went out the window.
But if we want,
and also I think when those journalistic entities, if you think of the past of these media companies, when they had journalism divisions in their media companies that were not profit centers, I think
CBS
there was a transition that happened when they became considered entertainment, right? They were aggregating, they were advertising based. The advertising as well as the content became closer and closer together. So audience numbers drove revenue, profit centers, where a lot of those media companies in the past saw those journalistic departments as losses in the company, right?
Yeah, well, there were other rules in the FCC regulation at the time that required broadcasting entities to figure out what the public issues were and address them. It was called the ascertainment proceedings, and that's why the big networks established these news divisions that were loss leaders, essentially. And let's face it, you used to be able to tune in and watch Walter Cronkite, and I think most people felt they could trust what was coming out of his mouth because he was a serious journalist and he was doing what was required, to present that fair and balanced, and they had an economic incentive, or at least an economic risk, if they didn't present things in a balanced way. And, for good or bad, that's no longer the way it works.
And today, the only way that any of this is going to change, any of it, it's not through politicians. They're not going to change shit. They're not. It's people. People are going to have behavior. You're going to have to vote with your dollars. You're going to have to decide whether or not you're going to support a entity and their sponsors, and that's the only way. And it's almost social justice warrior stuff, but you as an individual have to be your own social justice warrior, decide what you support and what you won't. Yeah. And then but again, that sounds all great, altruistic. Yeah. But
you didn't just get liberal on us, did you?
No. No, I'm pretty middle down the road. But I think what we have here is we're a bunch of sheep. We're all, we just follow, so.
Right. Well, there is a media.
Talk about that Amazon and the market power. Right. How many of us bother to get up out of, especially in the pandemic, but bother to get up out of our chair and go to a store to buy something because we like that store and maybe it's a locally owned business? No, we mostly just pull up the phone and order the thing, and it comes in a couple of days and we're done.
And to that's a whole nother 5 hours discussion. Walmart was open and Myers was open here, but all the local mom and pop stores were closed. So it went back to this whole same thing. We're just feeding this bigger beast of bigger companies making billions of dollars, and the mom and pop small businesses, the power of this country. This pandemic has really shown that out, but that's a whole different topic. Hey, you know what? We're at 90 minutes.
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
So
we made it.
We have made it to the end. Gordon, thanks for your insight, concepts, your commentary here. And for those of you that hang out, we had a pretty good crowd hangout today. Had a whole bunch of people on YouTube, a bunch of people on Facebook. Some people came in. I think people came at the beginning, Rob, to see fireworks. And there wasn't, because the numbers on Facebook went down. We had about 10 or 12 on Facebook for the first 10 or 15 minutes. They said, we're not going to be doing any fireworks. And then those people left. So
you see, we should have said inflammatory stuff just to keep it going.
So those of you that hung out with us all the way on Facebook and YouTube, thanks for doing so. And get over to newmediashow.com and click on the subscribe link. But Gordon, what's the way you do a podcast? Give everyone your information.
So my podcast is called Entertainment Law Update, and it's .com, entertainmentlawupdate.com. But you can find me at G Firemark on most social media. On Facebook, I'm the podcast lawyer. And my name, Firemark, makes it pretty easy to search for me.
Right.
And Rob?
It's a good one. You can find me on Twitter at Rob Greenlee, and you can send me an email if you want. I'd love to hear from you. Send it to robg@libsyn.com. And we'll be back on Wednesday, right, Todd?
Yep. So I'm Todd at Blueberry.com or at Geek News on Twitter. We are going to try an experiment. We're going to see if my streaming provider has found my solution, because I'm going to click to a screen capture, and if the stream dies, I'm going to be moving to a different provider because they've had a week to fix this. So we'll see.
So are you going to test that right now, Todd?
I'm going to test that right now as we leave. So.
Oh, okay. Well, Gordon, thank you so much for spending an hour and a half with us talking about all these issues.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a lot of fun and a little bit of an intellectual exercise. I appreciate it.
It's absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. We're going to go ahead and flip the screen. We'll see you on Wednesday, and we'll see if we get cut off the air as soon as I flip this. And here we go. We'll see. Are we still here?
Todd, had you determined that it was at the streaming provider level or the individual service?
I thought it was Facebook, but we will know here in a second. It was Wowza. Oh, I bet it died. Is it staying on? It did stay on. That's a good sign. So the image stayed.
You went to your logo slide?
Yeah, you guys can't see it because all you see is...
you're not sharing.
Yeah, not sharing the...
I'm looking at it on my phone and I see it.
So
it's still up. So.
It's still up. We'll see if this holds. Let me check on Twitch. Yeah. Oh, good. Well, they figured it out.
Did they explain why that happened, Don?
Well, okay. So I'll come back. We're still live.
Yeah, I know we are. Yeah.
There was some setting they said to take off on. It's been on there forever, and they said change the setting and try that, and it worked. But that setting's been there forever. So your guess is as good as mine. The main thing is it's still on. So anyway. All right, we're going to leave for good now. All right, everyone, take care. We'll see you next time.
Bonus content here.
Yeah, bonus content. All right, bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Well, now I'm dying to know what streaming provider that was and what the setting was.
It was Wowza. And so I'll give you the actual code.
So they're the aggregator you send to Wowza and they send it out to all these other services?
Yeah. So
Right.
So it was called...
the stream splitter.
Yeah, it was called the Stream Smoother. They told me to turn that off. And
interesting.
Yeah, and it was on. It's been on since I started doing this stuff. So
it must cause some kind of a drop in some signal that it looks at and says, "Oh, the thing went away."
Yeah.